Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of the attendees participating throughout the Middle East and all over the world. It's a pleasure to see so many people joining the next iteration of the Security Middle East magazine webinars. My name, as always, is Daniel Norman. I'm the moderator for these sessions, and I have the pleasure of introducing a couple of individuals from Magnet Forensics. Today we'll be exploring digital forensics, and it's a topic, in my opinion, that is incredibly important in today's dynamic threat landscape and some of the challenges that organizations are facing, and being able to proactively identify and understand who and how organizations are being impacted by cyber threats and beyond is something that is critical for any business. So I have two speakers that are joining us today. First, Gavin Hornsey. He's had a lengthy career in system administration, storage, backup engineering, and of course, digital forensics, with experience in both the public and private sectors. He's been a part of the South Wales Police Digital Forensic and Cybercrime Unit, so I'm sure he'll bring a lot of case studies and examples to the table today. Joining Gavin is Chris Blight, a solutions consultant as well, and he spent as well another 15 years working in law enforcement for South Wales Police in the UK. So yeah, both individuals have an interesting background that I'm sure will be enjoyable for us to hear on this webinar today. As always, if anyone has any questions, please do load them in the question pane, and we will endeavour to get to them towards the end of the webinar today. However, the first 35-40 minutes or so will be run by Gavin and Chris. So yeah, Gavin, Chris, really looking forward to this one. More than happy to hand over to yourselves.
Thank you very much, Dan. I'm just going to grab the screen. I just want to ensure everybody can see my screen. Is that showing up okay? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And again, it's great to see so many people in attendance. As you can see, the topic that we're going to discuss today is from internal actor to external breach, how digital forensics will enhance your investigation. Now, we've seen a lot of adoption of digital forensics in the corporate space. It seems to be really gaining traction. And lots of organizations are starting to realize the value of adopting digital forensics as part of their cyber response. Now, this can be in terms of, it could be part of a SOC team and, investigating potential breaches. This could be in internal investigations. You could have HR investigations, internal fraud investigations. I know some companies, when they have individuals leaving the organization, they may want to acquire and perform investigation on or an examination of devices. Now, we're going to try and put everything in a little bit of context today. So we've actually got some case studies. So as opposed to just sort of throwing generalizations at you, we're going to have a look at a few different case studies and how digital forensics can really be adopted and utilized in the real world, in real world cases. I will let Gavin introduce himself.
Thanks, Chris. Good day, everyone, and thanks to Dan for the intro there earlier on. Yeah, my name's Gav. I'm senior consultant here in the Magnet EMEA global sales team. You can see on the screen here, my background, as Dan said, is quite varied. I've worked in IT for many years, both as a systems administrator and also in storage engineering. But also a good portion of my career has been spent in digital forensics, computer crime originally as it was, which kind of morphed into an all-encompassing kind of digital forensics role, where I've worked on cases, criminal cases of all types, involving internal and external threats throughout my career, and become an expert witness and delivered evidence in courts as well. So it's quite a varied background. And this role myself now, I've been in this role for about 12 months, just over 12 months. And prior to that, I spent a few years working in professional services. So here at Magnet, I was part of the team that was building and deploying our enterprise stack for both public and private sector customers. And that includes things like our enterprise collaboration and review platform, and also our automation suite, which can take some of the things Chris and I are going to talk about today, and build them into an automated pipeline for you. So Magnet does a lot of very interesting things along those kind of fronts. But to round off this kind of intro, my contact details are on this slide, my LinkedIn profile, my email address. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'll hand over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Gav. A similar background to Gav in many ways. My name is Chris Blight. As Dan mentioned earlier, also from South Wales Police. And again, performing in examinations in criminal cases. And a lot of the information and the sort of artifacts, the data that we analyze and can retrieve in digital forensics investigations also has a lot of relevance in corporate investigations, which hopefully you'll see a little bit later on this morning. I joined Magnet, it's coming up to 5 years ago now. I started as a forensic trainer, so I was delivering training on topics from mobile forensics to advanced forensics to incident response to cloud forensics. So again, if anyone has any questions that they want to put to me, they can reach out via email. I've been a solutions consultant for about 2.5 years now. So that means that I get involved with the sort of pre-sales process and kind of help customers identify the right solution to meet the specific challenges which they may have in their organization. Now, digital forensics, some of you here may be more than familiar, may already practice digital forensics as part of your the way that your lab works or the way that your SOC operates, or you may be part of an internal team that does HR investigations. For those who are not familiar, the methodology can be slightly foreign to those who maybe used to just working in SOC teams, where you have a sort of a reactive stance or reacting to alerts. In terms of digital forensics, there's a very specific methodology that we follow. It is first we collect evidence. So this could be from it could be a remote endpoint, it could be from the cloud, sources such as Office 365, it could be a social media platform, it could be cloud storage platform. It could simply be an endpoint. We acquire data, we containerize it so that data cannot be altered, and then we examine that data. So the data we examine is from a snapshot from a particular moment in time, if you like. Digital forensics has been utilized in law enforcement, and I think it's fair to say that is really where a lot of digital forensic technology was developed, where it was born from. Gavin and I both utilized tools or variants of tools that we're going to show you today, things like Magnet Axiom. We've utilized Magnet Axiom as one of our tool sets for this particular presentation. But Axiom was a tool that we used to investigate criminal cases. As I mentioned, a lot of the artifacts do have relevance in cybercrime sort of environments. So in terms of what digital forensics can bring to you, it's about mitigating organizational risks. So if we can really fully understand what has happened in a particular event, it is easier to prevent that from happening again, whether it's shoring up security policies, shoring up employee conduct policies, what employees can do. It can give you a deep dive into what has occurred on a particular device or an endpoint to a far greater degree than, you know, sort of typical security tools or tools that you would utilize as part of the SIEM. You can really get a granular insight into what a user has been doing, what data has been doing on a particular endpoint. Gav mentioned some of our automation tools. We even our desktop products, Axiom Cyber, it'll do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. It will automatically identify artifacts and categorize them for you. We can automate, so we can sort of create workflows and pipelines, and we can do that at scale. So we can sort of take that up to the next level. And again, if anyone is interested in automation, you can obviously reach out to us and we can sort of dive into that a little bit further. And we've also got tools that are, you know, they're intuitive. We do have an expansive training portfolio, which we can use to help you maximize those tools. But all our tools are designed to be user-friendly. We have a user interface which is very intuitive and allows you to hit the ground running, as it were. Now, I mentioned we're going to try and give everything some context today. So these are going to be some case studies that we're going to approach. The first of those, Gavin is going to discuss, and this is where we look at an external breach. So, Gavin, I'll hand this over to you.
Thanks, Chris. There may be some animation in that slide.
There we go.
There we go. We'll let this run through. Okay, so let's take a look at a typical external breach, what we see, what our customers and what people we speak to come to us with, the kinds of things that they see occurring on their networks, occurring on their endpoints, occurring on their estate, their IT estate, their user estate, their business app estate, all of the things that keep them operational at risk. In this particular instance, we have a corporate endpoint accessing locally installed apps and cloud data. That sounds completely normal. That's what we use our endpoints for. In this particular case, there was a malicious email received from an unsuspecting end user, and they clicked on a link, and this triggers a sequence of events. An end user ended up downloading what they thought was an update and launched it on their computer. There's a payload, of course, attached with what's been downloaded and executed, and it is no malware. And of course, when an event like this occurs, you may have systems in place. You may already have that SecOps piece in place in various forms. I speak to some people who have SIEM and SOAR in place. Others only have SIEM. Some have manual mechanisms or bespoke mechanisms, and some just rely on internal communication to make people in various places aware of what's going on. Chris mentioned earlier on there in terms of where some of our automation stuff comes in is that we help integrate with your SecOps tooling stack. But to get back to this particular case, this involved acquiring data from various sources before lab analysis. So what we have here to summarize is that endpoint and a user and business data, and we have ingress via email, because in this case, maybe we've not got a complete set of systems in place to protect the entire estate. So we have weak points of weakness, and the DF examination, the digital forensics examination, can help us identify those areas. So, data sources. We've already said then that we've had an email's been received, and we have an endpoint. So this particular customer, they were Microsoft 365 customers, So they're using the M365 platform, formerly Office 365, for their productivity work. So all their common document type formats, their presentations, and other common business productivity tooling, it all resides in M365. Of course, what we know is that you can install apps locally on your endpoints. Microsoft apps can be installed locally, and you can synchronize that data from M365. You can work entirely locally if you want to, or you can use the web apps as well. So what we see already is that this particular endpoint that was compromised, we already have more than one source potentially. If we're looking for that malicious email, it could reside in M365 directly. It could reside as a local MSG within a PST on an endpoint. So what would we do in DF in this scenario? Well, we would be thinking, let's not just focus on the endpoint, but we also want to focus on the cloud source as well. And for this investigation, we used Magnet Axiom Cyber. One of the key benefits of Axiom Cyber is the ability to collect data from more than one source, and these sources can be of disparate types, and you can analyze the data you collect from these sources alongside each other in a single case. And that's really useful because you can then apply searches and filtering to data of different types from different sources, all within a single pane of glass, which is obviously invaluable when you're dealing with multiple points of ingress or points of compromise. The endpoint itself is useful for us, of course, as I've just mentioned there. The user may have Outlook installed, they may have a PST file on the machine, they may have a copy of the message on the machine. And of course, we know they've downloaded something, so there could be a binary executable somewhere on this machine is of interest to us. And if the machine is still running, and we'll see later on, that the memory could be useful to us as well. But we'll start with the cloud collection. So Chris, if we could go on to the next slide. So the first thing we need to do in this case is authenticate. So with Axiom Cyber, we do provide a means to authenticate with cloud platforms, consent-based, and we can use different methods. So if you are part of the team that administers your M365 estate, you can authenticate as an M365 global administrator that has rights on users' information, or indeed you can register an app in your Azure app registrations and use client credentials instead. So you have a few options available to you with how you authenticate with M365. And over on the right-hand side of this slide, there is a render there of the email that was received to this user, and it is typical of a suspicious kind of email with a hyperlink in there. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Chris. So once we authenticate with M365, we now need to choose what we want to collect. And because we know the approximate time of this incident, we can use some filtering options to narrow our collection parameters. And we would do this by means of applying a date range. You can also apply specific keywords to narrow your search field. This does have some implications on the Azure side. It is quite resource intensive, and we do suggest you limit keyword searches for this type of thing. But in our case here, we're quite happy that we know an approximate time where this event took place, so we can use a date range filter. The other thing to note is that once you authenticate with M365, there are lots of collection options available to you. We support the collection of OneDrive files and folders, organizational SharePoint sites, the Outlook mailbox, and messages, which is obviously what we're interested in here. But we also support things like Outlook calendars and Outlook contacts. And over on the right-hand side, you'll see a box there for unified audit logs, which of course, if you want to be tracking event-based data across your M365 productivity suite, then the unified audit logs are absolutely invaluable. But in this case, we just want to go straight into the email and search for some messages. Move on, please, Chris. Thanks. So we need to determine that collection profile. This is really important. I talk about this quite a lot when I speak to people, and it sounds obvious, but many of us don't have a plan of action when we encounter certain scenarios, particularly with edge cases. And I wouldn't say this is an edge case by any means, but for the more routine things, because quite often we work from memory, gut instinct sometimes. But what we would suggest is that you document your use cases and follow a run book, and then this kind of process of knowing what to collect and when will become second nature. It also reduces risk associated with humans acting in the moment. Though you're technical investigators, they should have the freedom to use their skills and ability to adapt to a situation as needed. At Magnet, we help you along this process of determining the collection profile or collection parameters. We have numerous things included, as you'll see on the slide here, called targeted locations. Targeted locations are customizable profiles to help make processes easily repeatable, and they're ideal for first phase collections. So in the screenshot here, you could see at this point, we've authenticated here with a Windows endpoint, and we have a quick checklist of things to collect. Now, for incident response purposes, this list will differ between different platforms, but this is a Windows endpoint. So you'll see in here things like the Windows event logs, which are really important to us, the page file, prefetch, registry hives, swap file, web browsing activity, volatile artifacts. As I say, this list differs between different operating systems, and we do support endpoint collections from Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. Okay, next slide, please, Chris. So once we're connected to this target endpoint, maybe we've chosen some targeted locations to collect data from. But aside from this curated list, there are other things we may want to collect. Now, we may want to go into the file system, and we may want to select files and folders, because we can do that. Once we're connected to an endpoint, we will enumerate the drives in that machine and allow you to explore them. We'll explore all the locally mounted drives, and maybe we can find our rogue binary that we think has been downloaded in here. And while we're doing this, whilst we're still connected, of course, this machine is still online. So this incident is still ongoing technically. And whilst it's still online, we now get the opportunity to perform either a full memory dump, physical memory dump, or indeed collect just the processes that are running in memory. We can do both. You'll see some other options on the screen here as well. One of the things we do at Magnet, you'll see that stop and delete agent option. We use an agent-based method to connect to this endpoint. And our agents in Axiom Cyber are designed to be ephemeral. So they're not constantly living and monitoring and listening on ports on your network. You deploy an agent to an endpoint only when you need to. And it will expire after a time threshold if you tell it to, or you can always choose to delete the agent at the end of a collection. Next slide, please, Chris. So we've got a data set. We've got some emails. We may have gone into the Outlook profile in M365 and we've collected the mailbox. We may have collected just a subfolder of that mailbox. We've connected to an endpoint and we've collected data from that endpoint. So it's one thing to collect the data. And as Chris said earlier on, one of the things Magnet does is provide granular collection options. We will generally collect as much data as we can, and you scale it back if you want to collect less data. So at this stage, we've got Outlook messages straight from the M365 cloud, and we've also got data from this endpoint. But the collection piece is only one thing. It's all very well having this data, but you then need to analyze it. So what we provide with Magnet Axiom Cyber is then the means to analyze this data that we've collected. And this can be tailored to suit your investigative needs. What many people do is they'll have playbooks and runbooks, and they'll have settings in place which are repeatable, and they'll use them for particular investigative types, for particular threat types. So, we're talking about an external threat here. Chris is going to talk about an internal threat. And on the other side of the house, kind of in the public sector side, we have people who will perform the collection, the analyzing options based on the criminal investigation. So at Magnet, we provide you with lots of different options for dealing with how you want to manage an investigation. In this particular kind of scenario, we would ensure that file hashing is enabled. We'll use these hashes later on for threat hunting. We also have the option of searching for keywords, and this could be useful for honing in on specific words or text patterns. We'll also search for native platform data for the operating system Windows and also M365. So I've not mentioned it at this stage, and Chris may mention it later on, but at Magnet, we are what you'd call an artifact-first forensic platform. So we will recover context-rich, context-sensitive data from the platforms we're investigating. And we give you full access to the file system for analysis, but we will produce forensic artifacts that you can just dive straight into in their native form. And of course, if we've collected the memory from this endpoint, then we'll want to analyze that memory. So Magnet Axiom Cyber does include two memory analysis frameworks, both volatility and Kume. And depending on the type of memory dump you ingest, you will have options to analyze the memory using plugins for each of those platforms. In terms of threat hunting, we can choose to search all of our data sets, in this case, using Yara rules. And we ship with around 236 Yara rules provided for us by Reversing Labs. And we can also look in Windows event logs using Sigma tables to look for events that correlate to entries in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Next slide, please, Chris. So what we've got at this stage, we've got an attack surface, which in this case has been the endpoint, and we've got the cloud platform where the productivity data lives. In this scenario, what we've done is we've logically contained data from the endpoint before an eventual shutdown. Once shut down, the machine can obviously be subject to a full forensic acquisition as well. Chris mentioned that earlier on. It's commonly used in law enforcement. Or you can just carry on with what you've already collected live. But an image provides digital forensic investigators with a point-in-time snapshot of data in the file system, and that data is rich in artifacts. Now, when you process this data, we talked a little bit about processing options and a kind of working to a runbook, but you can end up recovering thousands, millions of artifacts. So one of the things we do in Axiom Cyber is allow you to perform granular filtering and searching, so you can quickly find just the information you need. In this particular case, we'd be able to look for changes to the file system and look for malicious executables if they've been collected within the file system. The other thing we can do here, of course, is with regard to those Outlook messages that we've collected, we also have options to reconstruct mailboxes. So you can put yourself in front of the end user as if they were sat in front of Outlook and looking at these messages as they're coming into the mailbox. Next slide, please, Chris. So where to start? And the first thing many people do is with Axiom Cyber is that they will run some post-processing tasks. So after the initial searches and indexes have taken place along this case, we do have options. We can produce timelines. We will produce an absolute timeline across your data sets, but we can also use relative timelines as well. We can look for connections. So we can take an object in a case, whatever it may be. It could be a file, it could be a note, it could be anything, it could be an identifier of a person, and we will look for the relationship between that object and other things within your case, no matter which source they are from. So there's a few things we can do, and it is a good idea to do the post-processing tasks earlier on. So you have your mailbox reconstructed, you have your connections all built, and you have an absolute timeline that you can then filter upon. Next slide, please, Chris. So if we dig into the email for a moment, If we go into the Email Explorer here, or indeed just look into the artifact view for Outlook messages, obviously Outlook messages are a native mail format that we support. We'll be able to recover this message in here, and we can read it in both its HTML form, and we will also provide you with the body and the header, which can be useful to look for things like what's embedded in the hyperlinks. And in this case, we can see highlighted in yellow, there is a link to where a binary file is. We can also use the message header, of course, to look for dates and times. Next slide, please, Chris. Now, if we go into the File System Explorer, we should be able to find the file that we've obtained from the endpoint. And in here, we'll be able to see it, and we can look at its file created date and time, and indeed other date time attributes from within the file system. And we can look in here and see that the file was created in the file system after the email was received. All of this is done within Axiom Cyber's File System Explorer. Next slide, please, Chris. And is this a known threat to us? Well, we obviously got this collection from this endpoint, and at present, everything is encapsulated safely. Chris mentioned this in a containerized format. So nothing is going to escape that container unless you choose to export data from it. But what we can do here is, I talked a little bit about hashing earlier on. We have the hash values for this suspected malicious file. We can, straight from within Axiom Cyber, send the hash value to VirusTotal and get a quick indicator of whether there are any threats known to be associated with that file. And I iterate at this point, we are sending the hash value of the file to VirusTotal's public API and not the file itself. So nothing is being exported from that secure container. Next slide, please, Chris. I mentioned earlier on, in terms of threat hunting, we can also search for Yara. A little word on Yara. In addition to shipping with a few hundred Yara rules, you may be using your own internally, and you can add your own, you can load your own into Axiom Cyber. And if you are obtaining rules from the web, then you can synchronize rule sets from Git repositories as well. Now, in the artifacts view in Axiom Cyber, in here, we can actually look for Yara rule matches. And in this case, we'll be able to see rules that have matched patterns that are found in the malicious executable. When inspecting files, so if you then look in the file system at this file, you can also view the hex and the text streams, which is useful if you want to do some file header analysis and things like that. Next slide, please, Chris. And then finally, we have a word should be mentioned on volatile data. I mentioned earlier on, when you connect to a remote endpoint to collect data from it, we have the option of collecting volatile data. So this includes processes, and we can take a look at processes that are running in memory. And also we can, of course, produce a full memory dump as well. In here, of course, you can use the artifact view to look for all the kind of artifacts that are available to you for things like running processes, to obtain process IDs and things like that, and usage of memory. And you can correlate this against the memory dump as well. And like I say, depending on the dump that you ingest, we can use two different frameworks for analyzing them. So I'm going to pause there. So what I've talked about there is how we would approach collecting data from two different disparate platforms where a threat has been linked to both of them, and collecting them, analyzing them, bringing them into the unified pane of glass in Axiom Cyber, and where you'd kind of look for things to help you along this case of finding the malicious file that we suspected had been downloaded. I'm going to pause there. I'm going to hand over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Gav. Okay, so Gav has looked at an external breach there and a sort of methodology that or approach that you may take using tools such as Axiom Cyber. I'm going to take a look at an internal breach. Now, you may have part of your organization, a team that deals with HR issues. You may have internal fraud issues, thinking about things like IP theft, data exfiltration. Axiom Cyber can also be used to investigate these types of investigation. I'm also going to be briefly mentioning another tool which we can utilize, but we'll take look at our scenario first. So we're looking at a corporate endpoint being used as a personal device in this particular scenario. A lot of organizations adopt a bring your own device policy where people have their own laptops, maybe their own mobile devices. And whilst I'm not going to specifically look at it in this particular scenario, it's worth mentioning that we can also acquire and analyze data relating to mobile devices. These are becoming increasingly ubiquitous, and especially in an internal type investigation. I think more often than not, if you did have a sort of scenario where fraud or data exfiltration had occurred, there's probably quite a high chance that there has been a mobile device involved at some point along that line. In this particular investigation, sensitive documents relating to protected intellectual property have been identified on the dark web. 3 documents have been positively identified as being leaked so far. So in this particular case, we've got documents which relate to designs of a future product which is going to be released by this organization. A limited number of staff have access to the shared drive where the documents are stored. So there's only a particular team which has access to these documents in question. So that's going to be the focus of the investigation. And obviously the digital forensics team have been brought on board to investigate. Now, at the start of an investigation, you may have a very specific focus. It may be an individual that you want to investigate. That's not always going to be the case. In this scenario, for example, we know a specific team have access to these particular files. In some scenarios, you may have files which are digitally signed to specific individuals, so you could identify where they may have originated from, but that's not always going to be the case. So you may wish to conduct a triage at the start of your investigation. For this particular triage, I'm using a product called Magnet Nexus. This is a cloud-based solution. What this allows me to do is I can either deploy agents ad hoc, or I can have agents running on all of the endpoints within my estate permanently. This allows me to perform a quick acquisition of key artifact data to understand, I want to cast a broad net effectively, just so I can identify which particular endpoints I need to take a closer look at. So I've deployed agents across my estate. I have acquired data relating to application usage, cloud storage, connected devices, and web activity. You can see a lot of the artifacts we see in Nexus are the same as the artifacts that you would see in Axiom Cyber. So you have a very familiar sort of approach. We can also conduct keyword searches relating to file names of exfiltrated files. We don't also quite volatile artifacts to potentially capture any recent activity that may have been undertaken by the user. We could also, if the machine has not been powered down since those particular files were exfiltrated, we could also perform a memory capture, very much like we've done in Axiom Cyber. So I can see what processes may be running. I may be able to see files that are still residing in memory. So after conducting this triage, I can then perform a quick search across that particular device. I can see in this particular instance, I have got unauthorized virtualization software installed on this particular endpoint. I can see I've got VMware. This is not a tool which has been sanctioned. This should not be installed on this particular endpoint. So this is something I may want to take a closer look at. I may have also not identified any artifacts residing on the device itself. It looks clean for all intents and purposes. It may be that they've been undertaking data to exfiltrate these files using virtual machine to try and hide their tracks. So I've got a starting point. So this is going to look very familiar now. So Gavin, in his external investigation, acquired data from a remote computer and from the cloud. In this particular instance, I'm going to focus on a specific user's computer. And I could see using our triage with Magnet Nexus that they had VMware installed. They shouldn't have had that particular software or hypervisor installed. So we've acquired data from this computer, and we found that there was a VMDK there. So Axiom can actually process virtual disk images, things like VMDKs, as an image. You can import it into Axiom Cyber, and it can process it as an image file, and it would process that as it would any computer image. Okay, so what am I going to process for? Now, as I mentioned, I've processed this VMDK using Axiom Cyber. I'm going to focus on artifacts such as operating system information, web-related, cloud storage, email, communications. I don't exactly know how this data has got itself onto the web. Have they exfiltrated it using a cloud storage solution? Have they sent something via email? Have they used a third-party communication app? Have they encrypted the data before sending it? There's a lot of artifact data which I'd really like to process for so I can get an understanding of what's happened. Operating system artifacts contain an absolute wealth of data. We can be looking for file system changes, so what has been modified, created, deleted. We can see what files a user has been accessing. There are numerous artifacts which can indicate files that have been accessed, locations the user has navigated to. All of this data, in this particular instance, it's a Windows 10 image. A lot of data is stored in the registry, in the file system, which records user activity. Obviously, this is all recorded by the operating system to give a more fluid and smooth user experience, but it's fantastic for the digital forensic examiner because it's an absolute wealth of data. It can really let you understand what a user has been doing to an incredibly granular level. Gav mentioned we can also hash files. This can be particularly useful in this particular instance. I have got specific files which I believe have been exfiltrated. I can use a tool, I can use Axiom, or I can use a third-party free tool such as HashCalc to calculate the hash value of those particular files. And I can have Axiom Cyber search that image to see if those hash values are present on the device. So even if a user has changed the file name, changed the file extension of those files to try and hide them, the hash value will remain. So if they are present on the device, Axiom will identify those for me. So I've processed my my data, and I can see I have got files with matching hash values. Now, I can see that if it's quite visible on the screen there, Looks like they've tried to rename the files. I can see I've got process.dll.pdf. Seems a little bit unusual. Windows.dll.pdf, system.dll.pdf. They haven't changed the metadata though. I can see I've still got the name of those particular files. So I can see I've got schematic. So I've got a few red flags here. It looks like my flags are present on that particular evidence set. Now, if I process the USN journal, now USN journal, it's there for the purpose of the file system in Windows. It's there to maintain the integrity of the file system. It records changes to files on the file system. So if they modified, created, deleted, USN journal tracks all this. Now, this is fantastic for us because we can see that these particular files, we can see the file name being changed and the file extension being changed. I also have in my web-related artifacts, I can see I've got Tor URLs. These URLs indicate that Tor was downloaded, and I can also see a record there that Onion Share was downloaded. So a number of red flags in this particular scenario. Again, all of these artifacts are processed and uncovered for us automatically. We just have to tick the box for web-related and for operating system artifacts, and I can see all this data. Okay, I have got other artifacts here, such as application activity. Now, again, these are found under my operating system artifacts. We've got artifacts such as SRUM, so System Resource Utilization Monitor. This indicates that data was uploaded to Onion Share on the 8th of the 5th. So I can see a record here, and I can see I've got byte sent and byte received from this particular platform. Again, this is a platform that should not be utilized on an organizational device. And I've also got a SID indicating the user that uploaded this particular data. Now, System Resource Utilization Monitor, you've probably all seen this in Windows. It tracks your network usage, your CPU usage, your disk activity usage. Fantastic for a system administrator to understand how resources are being utilized. This data actually gets recorded though, and it's fantastic for us as examiners. Now, finally, I want sort of timeline these particular events to understand the incident. So using the timeliner, which we've got baked into Axiom, I can see I'm building a picture now. I've got a bit of a story sort of unfolding. So I can see my user has copied sensitive files from the shared drive. Now there are artifacts such as shellbags, file explorer activity, which uncover this particular data. I can see that the user has then renamed the files. So I've got those in my USN journal. I can see that user then downloaded and installed Tor, and I've got this from my web-related activity. I've got prefetch files, amcache and shimcache showing the executable being run. And then I can see the user downloaded and installed Onion Share and uploaded the data. And I've got this from my Tor browsing URLs, my System Resource Utilization Monitor artifact, and also artifacts such as Windows Timeline activity. Again, it's an artifact, it's a feature of Windows which is there to enhance the user experience so they can see their previous activity. They may want to go back to that file that they accessed yesterday. They quickly access that in the Windows timeline. Fantastic digital forensic data. So I can see from that really quick process, I've got a timeline of exactly what has happened in this particular instance. Now, this could all be examined and ascertained within a number of hours. I can produce a report for that, and I'm ready to move forward with, whatever sanctions I'm going to take against that particular employee. So this is obviously, a very quick run through of some of the benefits of digital forensics in these different scenarios, whether an external breach or an internal breach. There are numerous other applications for digital forensics in terms of investigative needs. I hope you can see some of the value in this. Obviously, we've used it Gavin, myself, in criminal investigations for many years, and we've worked with lots of organizations that are now using it as part of their cyber response. Almost digital forensics is almost being tacked onto the end of their seam, as part of that sort of workflow. It can provide a deeper understanding into events. Something we haven't mentioned as well, also supports e-discovery. If anyone is utilizing e-discovery within their organization, we've got lots of clients who are using Axiom Cyber to process things like documents or emails out of their evidential sources. We can actually export those in a format or a load file that can be taken into e-discovery platforms such as Relativity. We can also use preserved data using our tools. So Axiom Cyber, you can see we can grab images, we can grab data from the cloud. That could be AWS, it could be Azure, it could be Office 365. We can acquire and encapsulate that data at a specific point in time, again, for regulatory or audit purposes. And we can sort of feeding back into that again, forensic collection provides a point-in-time snapshot of otherwise inaccessible data in a secure container. We use forensic image formats such as AFF4, which is recognized industry-wide when it comes to digital forensics. We can also acquire data in a zip file or an EO1 file. We are sort of vendor agnostic, if you like, in the formats we utilize to encapsulate data. So you can capture data using our tools such as Axiom Cyber. I'll take that into another tool if you have other forensic packages within your particular environment in your laboratory. I hope there was something useful for everybody in this particular session. As we mentioned earlier, if anyone wants to reach out to us for a one-to-one session, if you want to dive deeper into any of our solutions, we'd be more than happy to accommodate that. I think we are going to head back over to Dan. I don't know if we've got any questions that have been put to us in the chat.
Yeah, a few in the chat, and then a few I think I'd love to follow up on. This is a particular area of interest for me, having spent a lot of time focusing on incident response, business continuity, crisis management, and I'm always interested in how forensics fits into the wider, I suppose, cybersecurity strategy. And my first question for yourself, Chris, or Gavin, is where should an organization start with this? Do they have to be of a certain size or a certain maturity to start thinking about digital forensics? What's your opinion in your experience?
Do you want me to take that, Chris?
Yeah, sure.
So, Dan, it's a fantastic question, and it can seem daunting. And I think one of the key things with DF traditionally and historically, it could be seen as a barrier in some respects because of specialist skills required. That's no longer really the case, and you can embed and instill DF principles, tooling, and practices into your business, into your organization quite easily nowadays. Most DF tooling is very accessible. Magnets tools in particular are accessible to the point where you can be a relative layperson to get underway. We do recommend training, of course, because the data you're analyzing can be quite complex, but the tools themselves are not necessarily complex. Training is recommended, of course, but you can entry point into DF and start bringing it in as part of your SOC workflow. So events occur, something triggers an event, and then you have a response. as part of that response. Digital forensics, we would argue, should be in there some way, but it can be in there at the desktop level, driven by a human. And what I showed there some screenshots where everything I showed was driven by a human from Axiom Cyber on the desktop. Chris showed some stuff that was running in cloud. So on the more enterprise end, you can automate things that way. And indeed, you can take all of your digital forensic needs in terms of collection, analysis, both with magnet tools and third-party tools, and automate these processes so we can transform data on a pipeline. That's the more advanced kind of areas. But certainly from a how you start with digital forensics, today it is very, very straightforward and accessible. And if you speak to us, you'll see that you can be up and running very, very quickly with tools like Axiom.
Wonderful, thank you. And my second question, and I think it's probably answered actually by what's on the screen now, was what kind of device coverage do you have at Magnet Forensics? Can you pull data from pretty much any source on the network?
So I'll take that one, Gav. It's all really going to depend on the device itself. In terms of your internal organizational network, tools such as Axiom Cyber can be used to acquire data from endpoints within your network. We have different licensing models which allow you to deploy Axiom Cyber in different ways across a network as well. So we've got things like local license servers and cloud license servers. So, I could deploy Axiom Cyber into an AWS instance or an Azure instance, on a virtual machine. I could deploy it to physical tin endpoints. So I can easily deploy it very broadly across my organization. In terms of things like when you mentioned device coverage, obviously you've got things like mobile devices, slightly more complex. Obviously I used to work in a department that used to examine lots of mobile devices. Acquiring mobile devices can seem more like an art than a science sometimes. So you very much need the device in front of you. We do have tools to be able to acquire data from iOS devices and Android devices. To a certain degree, that can be done with Axiom Cyber or Axiom. And of course, we have our broader tools such as Nexus, which can be used to acquire data from endpoints. That is a cloud-based solution. So it's a lot more straightforward to set up and acquire data from endpoints with a cloud solution. I know that doesn't align with every organization's way of working, but we have to have different tools for different sort of organizational needs. And of course, you have cloud resources, and as Gav showed with his sort of scenario, we can acquire data from a number of different cloud sources using Axiom Cyber, the AWS, Azure, Office 365, things like Slack, as well as the social media platforms, which are more familiar to your layperson, not sort of organizational based, which have probably more relevance in criminal investigations rather than sort of corporate investigations. Absolutely.
And I'm just conscious of time, gents, but I'd love to get a sort of a closing statement from you both. And I'll frame a question there in terms of organizations that I've personally seen embarking on a sort of a digital forensics journey they try and integrate it with wider cyber risk management and the underpinning security strategy. So in your words, where should digital forensics fit into a wider security strategy, and can it complement other disciplines such as incident response, crisis management, and resilience in general?
Yeah, go first on that one, Gav, or shall I?
Yeah, go on. Absolutely, Daniel. We would argue that DF should be embedded everywhere there. But we understand that there's specific teams who do specific workloads within the business, and it's not just the SOC. There are other teams. The kind of threats we've looked at today, external and internal, they can affect teams such as the IT, the systems department, the storage team, the networking team. And really, you should position digital forensics high up enough so that it is able to work within the specific IT stakeholders throughout the business, where data may reside, or where services that provide access to data reside. And what we would say for new businesses coming into a DF methodology is land and expand. Start small and grow. Start with potentially some DF capability within the SOC or to the side of the SOC, and then look towards integration with the wider SecOps tooling. Start to look at automation processes. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Chris.
I think from some of our conversations that we've had with, we speak to corporate customers on a daily basis. Something, and this is kind of outside of, specific conversations around digital forensic tooling. It's really worth trying to break down those barriers between the different parts of an organization. Like Gav mentioned, you've got SOC team, you can have your IT, sysadmin team, network, storage. Because these digital forensic tools can play a part, can add value to a lot of these different organizational silos, if you like. We really sort of encourage trying to break down the barriers between those different silos so they can all gain advantage from the digital forensic tools. And we get ourselves involved in a lot of those sort of high level conversations to try and break down some of those barriers. So I think that's something that I'd also encourage.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Gavin, Chris, for your presentation today and for the insights that you've given us. Is really, really helpful. Thank you to everyone that's joined the webinar today. I would definitely recommend exploring the Magnet Forensics websites, and feel free to reach out to Gavin and Chris offline. But once again, thank you to Chris, Gavin. Thank you everyone online, and yeah, we hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good day.